Aha. Hello, everybody out there on Twitch. Just give me 1 second to get our audio level set up. Corina here from GameDev Cafe. We're going to be talking to Rich from Clever Endeavour today, makers of probably one of the more fun party games that I've ever had the opportunity to play, Ultimate Chicken Horse. So give me a second to get us set up here. We've got some really awesome music in this game, so I'm going to play that hopefully kind of quietly in the background. Okay, the music's awesome, but it's also a little loud, so I'll turn it down just a bit. Hopefully I'm not blowing out your ears there. Rich, you okay?
Yep.
Awesome. So thanks so much for joining us today. For anyone who hasn't tuned in before, I'm Corina. We do this kind of thing at the GameDev Cafe all the time where we talk to different game devs, people involved with certainly a lot of Canadian studios because that's where we're based out of. And Rich, I know you're with Clever Endeavour, which is out of Montreal, correct? Awesome. Montreal's a good place. We're actually part of an incubator there, or what used to be an incubator there called Execution Labs. So I think there's quite a few people who started in the industry, either in Montreal, Vancouver, or Toronto, but Montreal's kind of a hotbed. So one of the reasons that we're talking to you today is, of course, you've got your own sort of studio, which has been quite successful. It's got a really awesome game behind it. But I am really interested in you yourself, and I guess how you fell into this role. What exactly is sort of your role in the industry, just for people who may not have known you before this interview?
Yeah. I don't expect anyone would have known me. My role is, so technically I'm CEO. I'm one of the co-founders, one of the three co-founders of the company, but I take on a more businessy role. So anything that has to do with sort of business, finance, business development, PR, support stuff. I do some accounting, some legal, a bunch of stuff. I also do, on the more game side, I do some design. I contributed a little bit of art, sometimes temp art, sometimes some animations that went into the game, but very, very like small scale. And yeah, so I do a little bit of creative, but a little more high level design stuff. So when we get into design meetings, we are all actively discussing solutions to design problems and stuff. So I chip in there. But the more sort of holding down the fort that I do is on the business side.
So basically you cover anything and everything that needs to be covered, it sounds like. A bit of a jack of all trades.
Anything, sort of like picking up the loose ends. It's like my goal is to make sure that my colleagues can work on what they do best, which is creating art, programming, designing, etc. As long as they don't have to worry about stuff like payroll and tax credits and all that stuff, then they do a better job. So
absolutely,
that's sort of how I see myself.
That's a good way to put it. Certainly facilitates people doing what they can do best. I'm going to turn you up just a little bit here, Rich, because some people are saying the volume's a little low. Hopefully that works a little bit better. I'm sure it's on our end. These broadcasting issues are always a good time when you're live streaming. I guess,
yes,
given that you work for a busy studio, is this, is your role sort of day in, day out the same thing? Is it what people would sort of expect from what you just described, or is there anything a bit weird about it, especially working in, sort of a pretty successful little studio?
Yeah, I'd say, it changes all the time. It doesn't radically change all the time, but the tasks that I'm doing are different from week to week. And so sometimes it's trailer ideas, other times it's filling out documentation to apply for tax credits. So it can be very, very different.
Gotcha.
It's sort of handling all of the stuff that's coming in and that we're dealing with in terms of any external partners. So, for example, we're launching on console soon, and we're dealing with Sony and we're getting ratings from other companies. We're doing QA with other companies, etc. So my role is sort of the liaison in all of those places.
Gotcha.
And then if Sony comes to us and says, "Hey, we need these assets for a store," then I'll pass that on to our artists who will make the assets.
Gotcha.
But it's sort of the first line of defense for those external things. In terms of weird things, like things that people wouldn't necessarily think that I would do, we ship our T-shirts. Like we don't have anyone else who does our shipping for our merch. So on our site, we'll print up labels and package them and bring them to the post office and ship them.
So you're getting a hand packaged
it's not
shirt,
a ton of
right?
merch. Yes, exactly.
Nice.
It's not a ton of it's not a ton of work, and it's not enough work for another company to take it. Um, but yeah, little things like that.
Interesting. And if people are wondering, you
Yeah.
can go to the the section on the website that has shop in it. There's all kinds of really cute, adorable merch. I wouldn't normally tell you to check it out, but seriously, like the little hats and everything are so cute. I'm showing people right now. I don't think Rich can see the stream because of bandwidth, but it's definitely worth checking out. And if you know people who love this game, it's really cute stuff. That's really cool
They're
to know that
pretty
there's a sort of a face behind it too. Now, I guess, it's something that might be a dumb question to ask if you've always wanted to do this, but did you ever work in anything else? I mean, it sounds like just based on your expertise and again, sort of the success you've had that you would never have to entertain another career after this, but how about before?
Yeah, no, I don't think that's a stupid question at all. I think it's extremely relevant, actually. Uh, so I started after high school. I went into, well, in Quebec, the French part of Canada. There's a school that's between high school and university.
Cégep, right?
So it's like 2 years between, exactly, it's
Yeah.
called Cégep. So in Cégep, I actually started in music, and then I went from music into sciences, and I studied sciences with the goal of going into architecture.
Oh,
I changed ideas, and I went into mechanical engineering in university, and I studied mechanical engineering in university, and now I'm doing business stuff for the GameDev company.
So you've really done everything in your entire life?
So I just, yeah, so in terms of if I study what I'm doing, certainly not. Uh, could I see myself doing other things in the future? Sure. I mean, I see myself with this company, and I see that like industry, I love people, I love the creation process. I don't think, I mean, we've been successful and we've been financially successful, but it's certainly not like missions and boats off the coast of the Azores. But no, we're stable for a little bit, but we still need to make sure that we're producing. It's going to sell well in the next few years and future years after that. But I mean, I think the industry's changing and it's always going to change. And so what we end up, is my career path going to stay as this, or am I going to get more into the creative? Who knows? I mean, my goal is to get a little bit more into the creative role. But at this point, especially at this point on this game, there's not a ton of creativity needed right now. It's more sort of putting our heads down, and we're working on console ports for all three: PS4, Xbox One, and Nintendo Switch.
So
and those,
cool, yeah.
But there's not a lot of work that I directly can do on that if I'm not coding, I'm not creating art for it. So I'm more on the business side and less on the creative side at this point. But again, like everything in these jobs, it fluctuates, so it'll change in the future.
Totally fair statement. And I think there's actually a really important point to unpackage in there, which is that success is sort of relative. And we have a lot of people who watch our channel who I guess are just starting out, or they're interested in pursuing game development, but they don't really know if that's going to be their thing. And as you sort of did, they're sort of exploring different avenues. So what might appear to be a huge success from the outside, it still takes a lot of work and keeps the team quite busy after launch, especially with you guys, since you're porting to all these different platforms. Really exciting for this type of game, which obviously, if you haven't played it, it involves co-op action to the extreme degree. I don't know really how else to put it. Every little facet of co-op and competitive co-op that can be mashed into a game is sort of here. And I'm not going to give too much of it away. We're going to do sort of a playthrough later on, so we'll show people what it looks like. But a really fascinating little game, and it's really interesting to know that, again, sort of there's a broad history of experience behind the people who made it. Now, your studio has kind of like a mantra or a motto. I should probably read it for people who aren't actually on the website. But basically, we make games that focus on unique mechanics that inspire people to play together. That's what Ultimate Chicken Horse is. Is that something that you personally sort of believe in, or something that you would want to explore, even if you weren't making games? Is that something that you kind of want to, encourage in others?
Yeah, I think that sort of mantra is something that and change. I think that's something that we enjoy and we would like to promote. But it doesn't mean that all of our games are going to be multiplayer, party games
Gotcha.
by any means. And the next stuff that we're discussing is there are some ideas that are multiplayer and that are more sort of party style, but there's also stuff that's completely different.
Cool.
I think that's an evolving studio. Our culture is growing, and there's a certain internal culture of how we act, how we interact socially, and so on. And there's also the external facing one, which is, what is the studio about?
Right.
Bring it out as we go, because this is our first game. We're not a company like Supergiant who's come out with 3 hits or so, and they have a consistent thing that they're like, hey, this is the experience we want to create. We're not there yet, so we don't want to force it. What we do forever, because it's we have a wide variety of interests and game ideas, and I don't think we're likely to we're not all like, okay, we need to make like, I don't know, 2D platformer party games.
Like, it's not going to be your thing forever. Gotcha.
No, exactly. And it's great that this worked, but we believe more in the idea that we can design good, fun experiences for people, not necessarily that we can design good, fun 2D party games for people.
Gotcha. Actually, that's cool to know. And actually, it's exciting because it means that there's potential to see something really different from you guys in the future. And I'd be interested to see, as long as it's still cute. No, I'm kidding. Because this game's super cute.
That is an important point. Actually, I mean, cute is one thing, but sort of family friendly is something that we've always discussed. And I can't really see us doing something that's overly gory or there's just really no purpose for it in our minds. And like, none of us are hardcore into any games that are particularly like that. We're all pretty big fans of Nintendo, and so I see us going in more of that kind of direction in terms of style, in terms of making something that you can play with your kids or together, etc.
That makes sense. I work with a studio, Lightning Rod Games, and we're sort of the same, family-friendly idea. And I think, especially once people start to associate you with a game that's out there, it sort of benefits you to play to that community at the very least. Interesting. I guess for you personally, is this the type of game that you sort of are into playing, or is this way off track? I don't know what kind of games have inspired you in the past, or what your favorite games would be, but do they fall into this sort of party 2D action platformer bucket?
No, I'd say probably not. So the game came out as a game jam, which was between the three co-founders, plus there was another person who left shortly after the game jam. But, it came out as a game jam, and the idea that it was a 2D platformer was partially just constrained. It was like, okay, we have this cool idea. Let's make it. It's got to be working within 24 hours, so let's do it. And we've played platforms. I played Super Meat Boy, and I like that kind of thing. But I probably wouldn't have said before I started playing to look for design-wise, to look at comparisons and how people do certain things. Before that, I don't think I would say that platforming is like platformers are my kind of game. My favorite kind of game experiences tend to be more like Zelda, Skyrim kind of things, adventure, fantasy. Like the fantasy thing. It doesn't have to be fantasy like dragons and swords, but fantasy like just another world that's far off from our own.
Escapism. Yeah,
it's just cool. I've always been interested in that in terms of movies and books as well. And so this is definitely not like my dream game. In fact, it's no one in the company's dream game. It's just a game that we like, and that I think we kind of struck a design that is interesting, that hasn't really been done before, and we recognize that we enjoy it. It's not like we don't like the game, obviously. But part of the reason that I think it's been able to have success is because we don't have one person who's like, hey, you can't give me other ideas.
Right.
It's been sort of communal, and it's been like, okay, here's the design problem. How do we fix it? And no one is so attached to any one piece of it, they can't in a little bit. So we're all fairly open to understanding design solutions that maybe are outside of what we were thinking. So I think that was an important thing, and I think that as a basis for our studio is going to be good, because that means even if the next game is someone's idea, they're going into it with the assumption that, you know, their idea can change and they can take feedback from people who might know better than them or have different opinions that could be better.
Interesting. Do you find that that's something that your studio, I guess, is that a rarity at your in terms of the game dev community? Like, is that something your studio handles better than maybe other experiences you've had with working at jams or with other devs?
So I wouldn't say we do it better, because better is very relative.
Hard word, yeah.
And who knows? But something that we do, something that we have here is that we don't really have like one person who's the lead. And some people would see me as the lead because I'm more outward facing and I'm more the business person.
Mm-hmm.
So you'll see me at more events, but that doesn't mean I'm the lead. You know, and our artist who's creating a lot of the art and making a lot of design decisions could be seen as a lead as well, because he's making a lot of those decisions. But we never really feel like that. It's not like follow what I'm doing, or it's not like do what I say.
Right.
It's more communal. And as a group of 5 people, that's fine.
Mm-hmm.
If we grow to that, then, you know, we'll have to figure out where exactly that hierarchy lies, if there needs to be more of a hierarchy, because right now it's pretty flat.
Interesting.
And we're all open to ideas. You know, like our programmer will give ideas about the art stuff.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't have to be, he's not going to have final say, but we trust our employees and ourselves to do the things that we're good at. You know, so if it's a marketing decision, they'll give me final say. If it's an art decision, they'll give the artist the final say, etc.
Cool. I think that's an advantage of being on a small team, I would imagine, because working on a large team, silos are just, I don't know, sort of a force of habit almost. There's nothing else that you can do when you're managing huge teams. But yeah, working on a small team and having the expertise and the input from everybody is, yeah, probably one of the main advantages to working with just a few. Is this the first game that you guys have released together?
It is. Yeah.
Interesting.
So it's a first for actually a lot of things. It's a first for me for the games industry. I never worked in the games industry before that. So our artist, he worked a little bit on games, but he was mostly doing animation, art and animation for film and for commercials and things like that.
Oh, interesting.
And he'd always wanted to be in games. And then our programmer was computer science with a specialty in game development. Mm-hmm. But he was working before at a programming job that was not game related. And on his free time during that thing, he was making games. So there was kind of like, we all wanted to do this. We just hadn't had the chance to do it. And then so when we came together, it was like, we're all doing what we want to do with different areas of expertise and with different experiences, right? I mean, our artist comes from a film animation background, which is fairly different from someone who studied at game development.
Absolutely. And were you guys friends beforehand? Like, how did you actually find each other?
So me and the programmer were friends since we've been like 5 or so. We went to elementary school together. So,
awesome.
And I was very close with his brother, more than him growing up.
Cool.
And it was just like the perfect fit. Kind of, he had been studying that, and that was sort of an obvious fit. And then the artist, Kyler, we met at dev meetups. So there's these monthly game dev meetups in Montreal. And I met him and kind of pitched him some ideas, and he was kind of like, well, you seem cool, but, you know. And then the next month, the same thing happened, and eventually I think he was kind of like, okay, you know what, let's dive in. You know, I'll go back to doing my thing, and everyone will go back to doing what they were doing before. So far that hasn't happened. So
so far so good. And yeah, I guess exactly. Is the studio then based on some of the funding applications that you mentioned? Like, is that sort of how you guys decided to make this project a go, or did you take a big risk personally just to invest your own time and see what happened? How did you decide to push the go button on this?
Yeah, I think we took the risk ourselves. I think we were fairly fortunate in the sense that me and Alex, our programmer, were living at home, you know, not a ton of expenses, and you know, good relationship with parents, etc. And Kyler had some money saved up from his contract work. Nice. And so we all had a few months of like, okay, we can survive without a salary for a little while. And then eventually ran a Kickstarter with the game, which paid us a little bit, still not nearly enough to survive if we weren't in that fortunate situation that we were in.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but but yeah, so I think it was a combination of being in a fortunate situation um, and just kind of saying like, okay, there's a limit on this. Like, we're going to make the game, we're going to put it out, we're going to see what happens. But then as we continued thinking that way, there was more hype around the game. The Kickstarter was successful. We got invited to PAX West, and we got a bunch of
nice.
good press and reviews and stuff there. So that was our first PAX, and we got articles in like IGN, Kotaku, GameSpot, Giant Bomb, everything. We're like, okay, maybe this is a real thing. And then we raised some more money through like a private investment,
mm-hmm.
and then we're able to launch the game like that.
Interesting. So that's that's a scary way to do it, but I mean, I'm really glad that it's at least starting to pay off for you guys. And with the console sort of port overs, is that something that you guys had decided to do from the beginning, or did that come as a result of sort of the popularity and success that you had?
No, that was something we always wanted to do. I think we knew that the game is better a console game than a PC game, or it's more of a multiplayer sort of couch game than a PC game. And so it's impressive that the sales that we've had, considering I think people who are playing on PC are largely playing. Well, actually, I can't say that. I don't actually know if people are playing multiplayer online more. But a big thing that attracts you to this game is the idea of playing with your friends in the living room. So I don't know how many people have setups where they can play their PC games in the living room. I would have thought that it was less than sort of how it's been. And so we were like, okay, well, when we get to console, then it's going to be able to do well because that's really what it's built for. And it's taken a while to get there, obviously. But I still think that there's a lot of potential I think there's a lot of people, especially younger people, who maybe haven't heard of the game or have heard of it but never played it because, they just don't play PC games. They play console games because they're 10 years old and I don't know.
That's their access point.
They've got an iPhone. They've got an iPhone and a PlayStation, right?
Actually, I was going to ask you guys about that. Is this a game that you always thought would play to a younger audience? Because if you look at, so press aside, because obviously the press is geared towards an older, I think, audience. But when you look at the type of people playing the game and the Let's Plays that are up on YouTube and everything else, there's a lot of older people. It seems, who really, really love this game. And as you said, there's sort of almost like an untapped market that hasn't even been introduced to it. Did you expect that from this game, or was it like, did you have sort of an age group, or was it intended to be universal? Because, you mentioned making sort of kid family-friendly games, but I wonder if you guys had predicted how the community would respond to the game before you put it out there.
Yeah. I think it's less that we were aiming for a younger audience. It's more that we were making it available to a younger audience. And the art style was pretty locked in from the first game jam, and we decided we wanted that cartoony art style. So that might push away some older players, or maybe some 20-year-old-ish players.
Right.
3D graphics and gory and whatever.
Hardcore, yeah.
But we figured the amount of people that we're including by making it more child-friendly is significantly more than the amount of people we're pushing out by making it gory or whatever. So that was sort of the basis for that. In terms of the player base, we don't really know that much because we don't get tons of information from Steam. Like we don't get things like the age of people. We get where they're located, but we don't get a lot of stats on things like the age of the users or gender or anything like that. So we don't really know. But what I do think we see a lot of is a lot of YouTubers playing the game, but the YouTubers who cater to younger kids, so people like PewDiePie and Markiplier and Jacksepticeye and those people, their audiences are much younger. And what I'm imagining is that those people have seen the game, but they never had a way to get to it. That hopefully when we launch on console, we'll have enough of a push that YouTubers will start playing the game again. And if they're playing the game again, hopefully there'll be more visibility to the younger crowd who can say to their parents, like, hey, can I buy this game? With their parents, who have probably forgotten about it by now, they'll see YouTubers playing it and they'll say, oh, look, that would be a fun game for a family. That's sort of our goal.
Interesting. No, that makes a lot of sense, and it's actually puts a lot of, I guess, excitement on the horizon for a game that's already been out for a while. It's got a lot of legs left to run, which is kind of exciting. Have there been any major challenges in the making of the game? Any moments where you just weren't sure if it was going to get done, or just any major hurdles that, I'm sure other game devs have been through, but, that kind of come with the launch of a project?
I think the biggest one was that we had planned not to have online multiplayer. And the reason for that was because we're a small team making a game jam game, and that was kind of it. We're like, okay, we'll put this game out, we'll put it up for $5 or something, and we'll see what happens. And then the feedback just kept getting more positive feedback. We're like, okay, well, this is becoming a real thing. Finally, at PAX West, so this has already been almost in development, and we were only 6 months away from launching. PAX West, we showed off a single-player version of the game. The single-player version was a sort of puzzly kind of version of the game, and it was going to have a whole campaign and stuff. And we tested it, and people were like, it's cool. It's not really the same game. Like, I want to go play with my friends. But when's online multiplayer coming? Which everyone who passed by was like, when's online multiplayer coming? So we're like, well, okay, maybe we have to do that. And so we decided to scrap the single player thing and dedicate all of our time to getting the online multiplayer stuff working. And that, I think, was the biggest challenge, because had we thought of it from the start, or known it was going to be the case from the start, it would have been a hell of a lot easier. We had to refactor code, as in rewrite a whole bunch of stuff.
Yeah.
And we had to, there were just also, there are still things coming up, bugs that are coming up that were like, why is that way? And it's like, oh, well, because, before online multiplayer was there, this thing happened. And it's like, it's been a year, I don't know how long, it's been a while, a year and a bit. And so that I guess is kind of the biggest thing, was not knowing in advance that we were going to do online multiplayer and not planning for it. So next game, for sure, before we
lesson learned.
do something like that, we're going to, yeah, exactly. Like, we're going to try and build from the base up, assuming that we're going to be putting in lots of stuff, or at least leaving room for lots of stuff.
Gotcha. Has it been worth it, do you think, like, to the community to have that option available? Like, you mentioned that people were really curious about it, but is it being used? Is it something that people are loving?
For sure. There are still some problems with it, of course, but I'd say of ours, like, we would probably have made less than a third of the sales that we made if we didn't have that. Because, not necessarily because people are only playing online, but I also think if you're buying a game on Steam to play with your friends, the fact that you can also play it alone online or online with your friends just adds, I think it might make the difference for a lot of people between like, oh, should I get this? Is it worth it? And like, okay, I'm getting it.
That's interesting. And a good point.
It kind of like pushed them over the edge. And even me, when I'm buying multiplayer, like we bought a bunch of multiplayer local games for the company just to play around. Like every Friday we play some games together. And we bought them. And if I was buying it for myself, I might consider twice if it was only a local multiplayer game. Because I'm like, well, how often am I really going to be with my friends in my living room with my computer connected?
Everyone else, yeah.
So I imagine everyone else has, and I'm someone who has that set up in my apartment. Most people, I imagine, don't. So so I think it's a very important thing, and console's going to have it as well. So if someone's buying it on console, they know they can play with their friends on console.
Awesome. I definitely agree with you, and I think that it's funny, we at our studio we do the same thing. We always look for games that we can easily play multiplayer online. We're a remote studio, and I think people nowadays game remotely. It's not about whether you have friends who like video games, it's about how much free time and access you have to each other. And as you mentioned, for a younger audience, that's even more true. We all know that we had to beg our parents for rides everywhere. Very interesting. Now, I don't think I actually mentioned this to you before we chatted, just getting started today, but I was introduced to your game through the Independent Game Awards that took place at GDC this year. I was a judge, and that's actually the first time that I came across the game. I'd heard of it. Yeah, it was actually kind of just a serendipitous thing. So I'd heard of it, but it wasn't until, as a judge, you kind of take a little bit more time to play through all the features. That's when the game really started to appeal to me. It took me spending time with it in order to get interested, and that's where I think the online multiplayer makes more sense, because as an individual, when you're isolated and playing a game, you're, I think, a little bit more resistant to jumping in and trying wacky experimental things, whereas if there's other people doing it too, you all feel kind of silly, and it's definitely way more fun. Um, it's just so
Yeah,
funny
no,
that,
for sure.
yeah, it's so funny that, again, a lot of these games that came up through the festival this year, and the awards nomination process, I've actually since come to get to know their devs and talk to them and learn the stories behind it. So it's really interesting to hear how Ultimate Chicken Horse came to, I guess, fruition. Getting back to sort of you personally, is there anyone in the games industry who, you mentioned that this is sort of your first foray, a big project, I think, to take on as your first, but is there anyone who you sort of look to as a mentor or look to for guidance, even just like on the community level in terms of getting involved and figuring out how to launch a game of this scale and magnitude?
For sure. Mostly, I'd say Montreal folks, because people I met through GameDev meetups and so on, and just people who have studios in Montreal that I've met for coffee and so on.
Nice.
There have been a bunch. I mean, Tanya from Kit Fox Games,
Oh,
I
yeah.
imagine you know her.
Yep.
She was the big influence. Dan from Double Stallion, also
Nice.
Montreal studio. Will from Thunder Lotus Games, they have a game called Sundered, which is coming out soon.
Yes.
And Guillaume for Compulsion Games with We Happy Few. So one of the interesting things you'll notice that was like, so Compulsion is a much bigger studio than the other ones. One of the interesting things with the community in Montreal is that I can, email someone like Guillaume who has a 30-person studio and say, hey, want to grab lunch? And he'll do it. There's no I'm not promising him anything. It's just like out of the goodness of his heart. And also Eve from Rogue Factor, they made a more time. So they hit him too. He's got a big studio and he's just happy to sit down and eat ramen and talk shop. And it's really great to have that kind of support. And I've given back a little bit of that to, I have another person who contacted me who's like, hey, I'm just getting started. I could use your advice. And I certainly don't see myself in a position to be a huge mentor, but I am certainly a few steps ahead of where they are,
Yes.
And then the folks like Compulsion are a few steps ahead of where we are. And so I like the idea that that's kind of how it is here. So those were definitely some major mentors throughout.
Yeah, it's very
Just
true
people
of
who
the
are
community.
running studios, and just kind of like, how do you do this thing? How do you we also in Montreal have a great support system. We have an email thread of like all of the indie devs, and indie in Montreal goes up to like 200-person studios. So it's
Wow.
indie includes a bunch of people, and even actually, so the Warner Brothers folks aren't included on that email thread because Warner Brothers aren't really indie, but even him. So the head at Coffee to talk about hires people and finds talent and so on, and retains talent and stuff. And it's like, why are people doing that? And the answer is just because someone probably did that for them 10 years ago, 15 years ago. And so it's just a great sort of community. I know I turned that into a mentor question, into a community question, but
that's okay. Community can be mentor.
it's basically everyone.
Yeah, I mean, in indie games, that's probably more true than ever. As you say, like a lot of people, there's a lot of people with experience, and like yourself, they don't necessarily feel like they have been in the industry that long or that they've had that much success. But there's a lot of people in that same boat. And when they're held sort of in the same regard as you mentioned, some of the larger studios, it's it creates a really good sense of respect, and that sort of pay it forward attitude, lives on like in a very real way. It's been really fascinating hearing about the Montreal community. Do you recommend getting involved in any particular events there? Obviously, MIGS is a really big one. I think Montreal Comic Con is this weekend too, isn't it?
Yep, it is indeed.
I'm not
And
going to be there.
there's a big indie zone that's sponsored by one of the actually the Lotto Quebec, so the lottery folks in Quebec who are into. I mean, they've always been into lottery games, obviously, because they do. But they've been getting more into video games, kind of realizing that the younger generation is not catching on, and they need to sort of change their business model. So they've got a lot more visibility in the video game space. So they're sponsoring a lot of stuff like that, and they've actually a little bit of a tangent, but they've even got a committee of sort of creative folks that their job is basically figure out like what are the next steps for this multi-million-dollar massive government organization. they've got a team of like 10 people who are young and like looking at all different media and arts and things to get some ideas.
Very interesting.
So that whole indie zone is sponsored by them. So if you're applying as an indie to go to the Montreal Comic Con, you actually get your table and booth for free.
Oh, that's a great tip.
And
awesome.
That's pretty cool.
And
I don't know if they'll do it again next year. But...
Yeah, I was gonna say we'll have to see but it's certainly something worth supporting. I was recently in Las Vegas and noticed the same thing. All the casinos have adopted video games like Pac-Man that you can win money at and stuff, and that's what the younger people are interested in. Monetized beer pong. I was just like, yeah, very different. So it's really cool to see it in Canada too. I haven't seen too much of that in Toronto other than the esports, but yeah, if you're planning a trip to Vegas, it's a little more interesting than it used to be, at least in that respect.
Yeah, that's crazy.
I guess when it comes to maybe events outside of Montreal, is there anything that you, as a studio or you personally, that you've found of great value, whether it's like the GDCs or I think you mentioned PAX, right?
Yeah, so I've been to GDC the last 3 years, 3 years, 2 or 3 years, and every time it's awesome. Every time there's very different things that come about from it.
Cool.
2 years ago it was meeting Sony, Microsoft, Nintendo, Google, all those people for the first time and creating contacts there, which led to getting our development kits and getting onto their systems and so on. Last year we went with actually the whole team, which was only 4 people at the time. We went with the whole team, and it was kind of a present to ourselves, sort of like we've done well, and here's a learning experience and experience. No one, like, I had gone with Kyler, just me and one of my co-founders, and both the programmers hadn't ever been before, so it was like, okay, let's go to San Francisco, sort of team building, and you get to learn stuff, and so that was a really good experience. Cool. I think GDC is great for really just for keeping up, and it's might be hard to justify the idea of like putting $1,000 or $800 into a plane ticket so that you can just kind of keep up with people, but it is hugely important. Like I met Will from Clay Clay Entertainment, and from that time, and Amir from Supergiant and people like that. Like since then we've emailed back and forth, and when we see each other at next GDC, it'll be like, hey, like it becomes more friendly than businessy.
Absolutely.
And I think that's one of the big things with GDC is that you move from the first couple of years I was making business contacts. The last year I was kind of making friends, and I think it's going to start to move in that direction, which is important. And I think it's important longer term in terms of advice, in terms of, but also just in terms of feeling like you're part of the industry and feeling like you're one of the people who can survive in this industry.
That's very true. Yeah, no, that's very true. And what about your PAX experience? Was that something that you felt was, I guess, helpful, at least for the release of the game?
Yes, so PAX was also hugely interesting. We went to that first PAX West, which gave us a bunch of articles and a bunch of press, and sort of told us that our game has legs and has like a reason, and that we should make it. And so that was a big thing. And then right before launch, we went to PAX South, which actually was a lot more useful than one might think. So PAX South is a little smaller than PAX East and PAX West, but there were a lot of YouTubers, and at least that year Twitch put in a ton of money, and they flew a bunch of streamers down.
Oh, cool.
And
okay.
Party and stuff. So there were a lot of streamers that came by the booth, and because it was less crowded, because it wasn't PAX East or PAX West, it was a bigger space and there were less people. So the YouTubers that came by, you could actually, you spoke with for a while, you gave them a Steam key, you talked about their channel, you talked about things like that. And I think we made some really good, one of the contacts we made there was Lord Minion, his name's Wade, and he is good friends with Markiplier and those folks.
Oh,
and
nice.
I think the reason they started playing that game was because he was kind of obsessed with it and brought it up the chain. And that came from him coming to the booth at PAX South, and from us going to a bar after and meeting up with him. And
wow, so that's huge. I mean, this is pretty good. Good tips for, I think, other devs out there who might not appreciate where the value of some of these events comes from. Because booth space is expensive.
And you don't know, right? Like that could not happen, and it certainly doesn't improve sales. I don't think. I mean, I know that shows don't improve sales, But if you're about to launch something, or you want to build a community, you want to meet the people who are interested in your game, or your game want to meet you, there's a lot of good that can come out of that. In terms of morale, if you bring a team member down there who doesn't really know what their effect is on, and then people come and say like, "Oh, I absolutely love the art style," and then your artist is like, "Oh,"
That's huge.
That can help morale as well, which is good.
Totally, that's a really good
They
point.
were, I think they were good. They were good experiences from a team building perspective. At this last PAX East, we sold T-shirts, and that paid for almost the trip. Not quite the trip,
Oh,
but it paid for
awesome.
the booth plus a bunch of other stuff. So that was pretty cool. And that was kind of like, the game's already been out, so what's the point? And the point was that a lot of people came to us and were like, "Oh, I love this game,"
Yeah.
and they left. Like, they're not new buyers by any means, but they're fans who were like, "Oh, I love this game. I'm gonna grab a shirt," or "I just wanted to say hi and thanks for making an awesome game," and I think is worth it.
That's so rewarding.
That was worth it. So
That's
even though
really
maybe
cool.
on a monetary standpoint it's not, there's a lot of factors that you can't calculate that might or might not be worth it. And for us, it's worth a shot. If you can afford it, it's worth it.
Absolutely.
We also had, so I got a government grant for a young entrepreneur kind of thing. The first couple times I went to GDC, so they paid for the flight and a bit of the hostel actually, because we've only stayed in hostels. But the flight and some of the hostel was paid for by the Quebec government.
Oh, nice.
To encourage promoting business outside of Quebec. And so there are ways to find, depends on the country, of course, but there are ways to find bits of funding here and there that can help help make my GDC trip the first year was like $400, I think.
Nice.
Instead of
thousands.
Who knows how much?
Yeah.
Exactly, thousands.
Yeah.
So,
No, that's really it's very true, especially in Canada. We do have a lot of funding opportunities. I was at GDC on a scholarship this year, so I know there's quite a few of them out there if you do your work. And as you say, going as a team is sort of a pretty amazing experience, especially if you've never been.
Again, if you can afford it.
Yes, if you can afford it. It's not going to shut your studio down, then yeah. Very, very good point.
So that's why last year we went with the whole team. The year before, no, and this year we'll see. I mean, we'll discuss it, but especially if the team starts to grow, sending 20 people to GDC is gonna.
It can be a little bit of a trick.
Cost a lot more than. Yeah. Exactly.
Well, in the meantime, we'll see how many T-shirts you sell, because they are really cute. It doesn't surprise me that you guys did well with them, and it's nice to have an IP that has that potential, sort of beyond the game itself. Thanks so much for the time today. I guess the last question I have, and I don't even know if you can talk about it or not, but are you able to reveal what's next on the plate at Clever Endeavour? You've mentioned brainstorming sessions and a few different little things that are happening that are different from the game you've got out now. What can you tell us, if anything?
Yeah. So right now we're working on the console ports and a bunch of new content. So there's going to be a big mega update when the consoles come out.
Ooh,
the big
cool.
mega update will be for PC and for everything else. And so that's going to have a bunch of stuff that I can't really talk about, but it involves new game modes and more content. And yeah, so that's I'm working on at the same time as we're working on the ports.
Awesome.
So that's the big thing. The next game we don't know yet. Interesting, because usually teams tend to know before they launch one game what the next game is going to be.
To be decided.
But it just didn't. Yeah, it didn't really work out that way, and I think that's going to be our next sort of big challenge.
Mm-hmm.
But right now, it still makes sense to be focusing our time and effort on this one. We're not at a point now where we're worried that we're confident that when the console comes out, it'll certainly pay for the amount of development time that we've been working on it for console.
Right.
So until that becomes an issue, we're not too worried about it. But we would like to have a pretty solid idea for a few different prototypes that we want to work on. And I think the only important thing with that, from a game dev standpoint, is that as soon as we start our next thing or things, we're going to try and prototype stuff and show it off very early. Show it off not necessarily to the public, but show it off to other game devs and to a small community early and often. And I think that's one of the things that worked with this game. Mm-hmm. I think it's something that we're going to need to be sure that the game is going to work.
Very interesting. I think
along every step of the way. yeah, it's like after a game jam, people were like, oh, that was really, like, I want to see more. And then after we made a little bit of a better version, they were like, oh, you should add this and this. And it's like there was always a lot of interest in it.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd like to see that in our next prototypes and stuff. All that to say, I don't know.
No, I was gonna say I think that's the whole point of game jams and being able to sort of dip your toe in the water is you can experiment and you don't have to marry yourself to one idea, and you can get feedback before, as you say, before you get too far along, and then have a major request sort of rolling in like you did with Ultimate Chicken Horse.
And also, before you fall in love with the product too much, because if you fall in love with it and then it's crap, and it could be that you think it's a really good idea and it's actually crap, and you don't know that yet. But if you are too in love with it, you're not going to relinquish that.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas if early on enough, you can just be like, no, okay, this clearly doesn't work. It's not picking up. And we'll find a new idea. And that's something that we're going to have to come to once we start prototyping.
Gotcha. Maintaining the perspective. Very, very cool. Well, best of luck with the console port. I'm sure that's a whole lot of work, and you're like, I'm not thinking about a new game just yet. Are you crazy? But that's cool. We'll certainly come back to you and bug you a little bit about any new projects when we start hearing about them from Clever Endeavour. But in the meantime, thanks so much, Rich. I think a lot of great insight here for people who are thinking about getting into game development, but also people who already are part of a studio and are maybe just curious about how events and promotion and sort of the type of rollout that is involved with a party game, especially an online networked party game, sort of what's involved with that. Thanks so much.
And people can also let us know if they have questions about something that I've said here or something that, just generally, in general, we're open. Tweet at us or get in touch. We're happy to talk to people.
Awesome. Yeah, we'll be sure to link everything up when we do post this video so that people can find you easily and ask whatever questions they may have. In the meantime, if you've been watching on Twitch, thank you so much for tuning in. We've been chatting with Rich from Clever Endeavour. They're the studio behind Ultimate Chicken Horse. If you haven't tried the game, I recommend trying it. Grab a couple friends. It's coming to all the consoles very shortly, but for now it's available on Steam. There's a great 4-pack offer. If you check that out, you can actually just grab it for your friends and have a party tonight. That's kind of what I'm thinking of doing with a few friends who I basically want to embarrass because they suck at platformers, and it would be really fun. Anyhow, I'm Corina for the Game Dev Cafe. This has been another Get to Know a Game Dev interview. We will make sure it goes up on YouTube for those who can't watch it on Twitch or were unable to find it today. And in the meantime, any questions you have, feel free to tweet Clever Endeavour through their Twitter. You can tweet at the Game Dev Cafe, and we'll see you next time. Thanks so much.